Hello my brothers, this is the Yoda, welcome back to your I'm a Celtic Templar, and welcome back to another What If scenario. And today off for this, Celtic month of March, I decided to ask y'all which one of the type of voter polls we should cover, and a lot of y'all actually did ask for the said, what if Celtic Britain was never invaded by Rome? And this one actually does have a really big meaning and history to it. Because one, if we understand in our own timeline, in 43 AD, Claudius Caesar invaded Britannia, majorly for one major reason only, as a political type form. In other words, technically showing the power of the emperor, that he wasn't weak. Well, in truth, in our own history, there were many forms of, riots, and as well, even, how should I put this, mutinies going on in the parts of the Roman military, who didn't exactly want to invade the island nation. Kind of a major reason why is because, well, the island was so mysterious and it even threw off none other than Julius Caesar that many Romans didn't exactly want to invade it. So, what if, for example, this Roman mutiny actually was bigger than what it really was? So, dive back, relax, and let's take a look at this alternate form in history, shall we? Now that we picture ourselves in this alternate form in history, imagine yourself as a Roman soldier pretty much on the said northern shores of Gaul. In doing so, you are ordered to actually cross the said British Channel and invade the lands of Britannia. Only you would mutiny along with many of your brethren, simply stating to the fact you would not invade, knowing to the fact it could lead you to your own certain demise and your own death. So, in this alternate timeline, the mutiny is a lot bigger than it was in our own timeline, leading Claudius Caesar to actually invade other lands other than the lands of Britannia. The invasion plan would end up taking about forms of four type of ways. One in the form of the lands of Persia, the other towards the lands of Egypt, and as well north parts of Europe, mainly along the Rhine and Danube River. Now in our own timeline, we already know that this wasn't going to work. In fact, Claudius Caesar actually chose Britannia because it seemed like the best optional choice, rather than invade the lands of Germania and Dacia. However, in this alternate timeline, with the mutinies, I doubt he would ever want to invade the land of Britannia. So where would he go? Well, to be frank, going to the far lands of the east was too dangerous, as the fact that the Parthian Empire was too strong, and in doing so, the Neo-Persian Empire was still way too much powerful for its own good. Towards the south, the lands was hazardous along the lands of the said Nile River, and which would be too dangerous for the said Romans to travel. So the only option was to go north into lands of Dacia and Germania. The first goal I could probably see none other than Claudius Caesar going with would be to invade the lands of Dacia, mainly along the said coastline, and as well conquering various lands, mainly such as rich mineral ore, and as well a type of lands for rural agriculture. Upon slowly and steadily actually conquering the lands of Dacia, we could probably see Claudius Caesar getting even more ambitious, and as well invading the lands of Germania, opening the way for future invasions along the line. Now, in our own timeline, this could actually understand many type of points in history, and as well we can also see how the Roman Empire would slowly start to get even stronger. And as well, this could even mean that even under the reign of none other than Marcus Aurelius, Rome could actually expand even further out from its own timeline. A lot more than it did in our existing timeline. However, I hear many of you already, but Templar, what about the Celtic Isles? Well, that's the thing. Even if we understand our own history, I can doubt of what we can understand it now that you look at. In fact, the Celtic people were actually mixed and divided all throughout our timeline. In fact, I can only see three type of Celtic tribes in the lands of Britannia to actually be major allies to the said Romans, mainly due to trade. This would majorly be the Iceni, Bergerge, to the said far south of the said Celtic Isles, mainly in the lands somewhere near the region of Dover. As well, we can also see the Catalani, these would be the most major type of tribes that would pretty much benefit the most from Rome. These are, as you can see, colored in pink and as well a form of brownish and green. Now I had to take multiple colors in this, so yeah. These would pretty much be the major type of roles and kingdoms that would later be established due to said connection with Rome. In other words, when Rome got richer and as well more powerful, so did these Celtic tribes. Over the time, I could pretty much see the Catalani, Bergergi, and as well Iceni slowly start to advance and as well make their way ever further towards the west and as well towards the north. All the while, though, we would also see other kingdoms even establish themselves even stronger, mainly into the far north and as well Midlands. In fact, pretty much by the time of the 3rd century crisis, we could probably see a said kingdom establishment somewhere near identical to this deal type of form. With the Picts to the far north, the Caledoni to the said Midlands, as well with the Iceni and as well Burgundians and Catalani to the far south, leaving only a small sliver of land to the said Midlands south of the Caledonians. In fact, by the 3rd century crisis, we could pretty much end up seeing the same type of scenario in our timeline, only a lot worse for Rome. As now in this timeline, the Gallic and as well Parmenian Empire are not alone, as now there is even the frontiersmen of the Germanic and as well the Dacian kingdoms, establishing themselves and as well becoming a major threat to the Roman Empire. All the while, the Celtic people in Britannia aren't exactly affected from this. However, overseeing this type of scenario, they would probably end up allying themselves with the said Romans in order to establish themselves for the land. However, because the fact that the Roman military is now even more stretched out than it is, we can pretty much see these frontiers lands actually giving way to the said Gallic and as well Dacian and as well Parmenian Empire and as well even the Germanic Empire, even further than they did in our own timeline. But, as we all already know in our history, the Gallic Empire would slowly fade away, and so is also the Palmyrenian Empire, along with the Dacian and as well the Germanic Empire as well, leaving only the Gallic and as well Germanic Empire to remain, only to be invaded from the far north from the said Celtivalani and as well the said Iceni kingdoms, to establish themselves in the far north, giving themselves a type of form of everlasting peace, simply putting that the fact that Rome would actually end up trusting said Celtic Britons to actually keep and occupy this land, only for a short while as it is. In other words, they have to somewhat pay for it in order to actually keep it. So, in other words, they are somewhat of a client kingdom to the said Roman Empire. However, if we know one thing from our own timeline, during the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Rome would end up giving away many of its lands and the lands of Germania, and slowly and surely the border of the said Roman Empire would slowly cross over back to the Rhine River. As well, the Iceni would pretty much be left on their own, especially as they become weaker and weaker, especially from the Catalani, who of which end up attacking the said Iceni people in the said lands of Britannia. Slowly but surely, the Catalani would end up controlling and as well occupying all of Britannia in the far south, leaving the Picts pretty much in control of the far north. The Catalani would still hold on to various lands and holdings in the said region of modern-day Gaul because of their stronger type of military. But because of the fall of the Western Roman Empire, we would see a various type of tribes end up taking hold of the said region, kind of like we did in our own timeline, with the Goths, Vandals, Ostrogoths, and so on and so on. Slowly but surely, though, if we know one thing in our own timeline, by the reign of Justinian, the Roman Empire would slowly regain its territory in parts of said North Africa and as well parts of Italy. As well, the Britannic people would slowly start to actually occupy and retake various lands in the region of Gaul, becoming a major power play in their own form in history. However, with the rise of Islam, this would probably put the Celtic people on hold, pretty much to the fact they would end up being forced to deal with a new type of major enemy to the far south. Now, the Islam would end up being defeated in our own timeline at the Battle of Tours. And in fact, this is not a major victory that is won by the Franks, but by the Celtic Britons. So much so, Rome views them as a major ally. But because they are cut off by a new major force of German forces to the far north, mainly parts of the Lombards, or as well a type of regiment of Germanic people that now call themselves the Holy Roman Empire. In doing so, we could see the Britons actually end up occupying various lands in modern-day France, or in this case Gaul, as it's now known as a province. Britannia would be forced to actually deal with unusual type of problems, mainly towards itself in the lands of Iberia. Not so much with the lands of the said Holy Roman Empire, making them as somewhat of a major ally, keeping them as a type of shield against eastern invasions. So much so, this could actually keep the said Britons more occupied with the lands in the south, or as well lands in the north with the Picts. All the while, the said Byzantine Empire is slowly on the downtrot as it is in our own timeline. Now, we would still see forms of raids in our own timeline from the Vikings, but not as much as we understood. Seeing to the fact there is no Saxon kingdom, there actually might be something else in general. Of which, this is a major point. What happens to the Saxons, Jutes and Angles that invade the lands of Britain? Well, they are probably one of the major people that are actually overcome by Charlemagne's empire. However, the Britannic Empire to its said west is still a major threat and it has a lot more power. But yes, when it comes down to the Vikings would still raid as much as they did in our own timeline, but pretty much Britain would be more of like how we would end up viewing Viking-era Ireland or Viking-era Scotland. Pretty much, it wouldn't be that much of a problem, or as well, kind of like how we would also view Viking-era Francia, except there is a major difference. Due to the fact that Britons are a lot stronger than they are in our own timeline, they might even subdue, or as well, even actually deal with the said Vikings over and over, so much so that they actually put them down and put them in their place, making them as a vassal kingdom. Which this leads to the Normans. Yes, I could still see the Normans still establishing themselves along the said area of Duchy of modern-day Normandy. From this, I could probably see the Normans actually establishing a major power base, either in Gaul or as well spreading themselves out even further towards the south. Mainly into Iberia, North Africa, and as well even parts of the Mediterranean, as they did in our own timeline with the Kingdom of Sicily. Only there is a difference. Without the invasion of England, I doubt the said Duke William the Conqueror would ever invade Britannia, knowing to the fact he probably doesn't even have a claim to the throne. And as well, he is now probably surrounded by everybody. So much so, there is no Battle of Hastings. This would probably cause Duke William to actually venture somewhere else in order to gain riches and as well better kingdom. So, the Duchy of Normandy somewhat becomes the Kingdom of Normandy, but without the said military manpower being placed in Britannia, we would pretty much see a different type of form of military power all throughout the Mediterranean, meaning the Normans are a lot stronger than they would be during the time of the Crusades. As well, there would be a miniature crusade in the lands of Iberia, as it would somewhat be called the Iberian Union, as that's as close as I can put to it, would slowly reunify the lands of Iberia into the name of the Christian Church, conquering the said Muslims slowly and as well assuredly in order to further up their own gains. By the time of the First Crusades, we could pretty much see the Norman kingdom pretty much bigger than it was in our own timeline, or as well nearly as big, but a lot bigger, as it controls most of North Africa, all of Sicily, and as well the southern boot of Italy. As well, we can even see them take a big chunk out of said parts of Gaul, and as well areas in Iberia, and as well even holding in so many parts and areas and lands of the Kingdom of Israel. So what would come from this? Well, simple. It's a lot bigger and stronger Byzantine Empire. Because of this, the Byzantines don't actually have to deal with a major crisis as they did in our own timeline, mainly with the Arabs dealing with the Kingdom of Israel. This would be a major blow and process to the said Muslim expansion. However, this would actually slowly increase the Byzantine military even more than it did in our own timeline. However, if we know one thing from history, this does not end well for the Crusaders. The Crusaders would still be thrown out as they did in our own timeline, and be kicked out of Arca. Now, in doing so, I can also see another form of 100 Years' War, mainly with the Britannic Empire and the Kingdom of Normandy, which the Normans are losing ground quickly. With the fact that the Kingdom of Normandy is a lot weaker than it is in our own timeline, mainly after the Crusades, this does not end well for the Normans, as they lose ground, but they would slowly gain it over time, In fact, from the Hundred Years' War, the Normans slowly start to lose major victories, and as well, the Britannic Kingdom actually establishes itself as a major power play. Now, even also to this day, I could even see the Byzantine Empire still living from this, mainly because there is no Latin Empire. Without the Crusaders wagerly winning battles and wars against their said Muslims, we don't see the Venetians, well, pretty much having the said Crusaders sack the holy city of Constantinople. Meaning, Constantinople can actually hold up a little longer, and as well, even reconfigure its military. Holding to the fact that, one, the Byzantines could probably win the fight, and as well, even hold off the Ottoman military. Forcing the said Ottomans to rethink their strategy, and slowly decay back to the said east. Pretty much over time, we understand that kingdoms would rise and fall, and Britannia would lose its land in Gaul, majorly because of, well, historical family attire. If we know one thing from history and medieval politics, it does not go so well for royal families. Britannia would hold on to major territory in its area across the channel, but in Gaul, it would probably fall to another sibling. So much so that, one, I could see Gaul establishing itself as the Kingdom of Gaul. Now, as well, when it comes to colonization, I could still see colonization still going the way it does in our own timeline. So, not much of a different change. However, that is by the 1700s, we do see the death of Charles II of Spain. This actually leads to a major anarchy as we understand it. However, this doesn't exactly end differently, as we understand. In fact, a new succession would come by the Normans, who would probably take the throne, and maybe even marry into the said Charles family line. However, without the line of Charles as we know it, there might never actually be a Charles II of Spain, leading to the fact the people of Iberia would probably end up uniting, and as well, even the said kingdom of Iberia, Sicily as it would be. No matter what, in our own timeline, I could still see Scotland and Ireland and Britannia unifying together into one kingdom. However, pretty much by the timeline, we could end up seeing Europe look still the way it does by World War I. In fact, World War I, we could end up seeing Europe still look the way it does. Now, though, there is a major difference. We could end up seeing the said Byzantine Empire become a little bit stronger as it did over the years, and slowly retake its land, but over the years it does become a major weakling and a major type of power play to its major powers are all around it. In fact, in our own timeline, Great Britain had the major empire, and as well, we could probably even see that with none other than Britannia. In fact, we can even see the Celtic Republic even establishing that as well. Now, though, how far it would go is left unknown, but it might be a little different. However, what could be different, especially more, would be the Spanish and Portuguese Empire are now unified together, so that means anywhere their territory was are somewhat united. And in fact, pretty much by the end of World War I, we still see of what happens in Europe, though. So in other words, even without the entirety of Rome invading Britannia, history still goes the same way as it did in our own timeline. The only difference is, well, a little bit more than that. For one, the major difference is the language, alphabet, and culture. What do I mean by this? Simple. If we take a look at it, without the said Romans invading Britannia, we don't have the Saxons that later invade, which means there is no English culture. There is Celtic culture. Celtic culture is more alive than it is in our own timeline. This means Irish, Scottish, Welsh culture, or as well Cornwallish. Any Celtic culture we know is a lot more bigger and prouder. And in fact, this also spreads to the Americas. This means we could probably see a different form of Celtic culture here in the United States, or as well in parts of anywhere the Britannic Empire was. Especially parts of said Central, South America, or as well parts of Northern America. This also means that even the French Empire, wherever it landed, or as well as it's now known as the Gallic Empire, wherever it landed, is more Celtic as well. The same goes with the lands of the Portuguese and Spanish kingdom. wherever they had gone and colonized, it also has a lot more Celtic blood than it does in our own timeline. In fact, even the language is majorly different. Instead of English, French, and Portuguese and Spanish, we would have something else in general. Now, Portuguese or Spanish, whatever you want to call it, for those people that said Iberia, I don't know what I can end up embracing it as, but I can still see it somewhat different compared to Celtic. So it does have some Celtic influence to it, because of the Normans. But not as much as it did in our own timeline. So the only major difference is the French and English language, of which there is none. In other words, if the Celts had never been invaded by the Romans in Britannia, I would probably be speaking a form of Celtic Britannic language, like Albanese or something like that. Of which, when we understand Celtic culture and language, Celtic language would be somewhat different than we understand. In other words, Irish language would sound extremely different compared to that of Scottish language, or as well, Britannic. The same could also be said of the Gaelic language. However, somewhat still similarities. What do I mean by this? Well, it's kind of like when we understand the language of Italian, Latin, and Spanish and Portuguese. Sure, they somewhat sound the same, but they are not the same. So, that's kind of the best way I can put it. But as well, there would also be the Celtic alphabet. Now, many people don't know anything about this type of alphabet form, but the best way I can put it is like the Irish type of form, as we see here. This is actually the best way I can understand Irish cultural language, and of which I wish the Celtic people kept this a lot earlier in our own timeline. But because it was forbidden, I don't know how I can explain this. But as well, another type of difference is the Western Church. Instead of it being Roman Catholic as we see in our own timeline, it is of Celtic Catholic origin. Celtic Catholicism was a major religion to the said Western cultures, mainly in the lands of Gaul, Iberia, and as well even Britain. And because of major saints in our own history like St. Patrick and St. Columba, the religion did spread. However, due to Roman Catholicism being the major power in the said lands of Central Europe, it slowly got replaced, and is which mixed with the Anglo-Christian Church during the time of the Anglo-Saxon invasions. So, yeah. Without those invasions, we see a stronger and more Celtic-type religion. So much so, Europe actually has more Celtic culture in Western Europe than it does anywhere else. Now, this would mean that even Belgium and maybe even the Netherlands and parts of Switzerland and northern Italy might have a form of Celtic enjoyment out of it. However, if we know anything from our own timeline, the culture here in the Americas would be weird and kind of twisted. Now, here's the thing though. If anybody even has a problem with actually learning English, just imagine how hard it's going to learn how to speak Celtic. Your tongue is going to be more in a twist than you can understand. But, yeah. So in fact, the Celtic culture, alphabet, and language, and even religion would be a lot more alive than it is today. But, what do y'all think? Do you think I actually went a little too far with this, or do you think I'm right in the ballpark? I'd like to hear y'all's comments and as well suggestions on how this point in history could have changed, and as which, if any part of it actually, helped out for your entire, search for this point in history. If y'all want any other views on this, I will leave links down below for other guys who did help out with this type of scenario, but they did leave out some major parts, and went a little too far ahead. But, that's up for y'all to decide. Anyways, guys, like and subscribe for more, and as well, if y'all have any what-if scenarios that we should cover, let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to check them out, and as well, come up with a scenario as well. Anyways, guys, it's been Celtic Templar. Hope to see y'all in the next one. Expert neer, je burt die jaar. Ook nomere keer die jaar, die beer, die spekkie, die specteria. See you around, y'all.